The case we've been talking about for weeks is finally upon us. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court holds live oral arguments regarding birthright citizenship and national injunctions. And you will not miss it because here on the Legal AF channel, we are live streaming it. Right now, I'm here to give you a preview of what to expect when you listen in with us. And afterwards, Popak and I will be doing live post oral argument analysis. So we've got it all here on Legal AF. Be sure to free subscribe so you don't miss any of it. But here we go with the preview. Going to give you a short little summary. That way, when you tune in with us, you kind of know what to expect. Because the thing is we're going to get a lot out of the questions, even well before we get an actual written opinion. Tomorrow, during those arguments, we're going to get a sense of where the justices are going. And this is what is at stake. So this is an interesting situation because typically we have seen in these last months the Trump administration going to the Supreme Court on this emergency docket, asking them to overturn administrative stays. Sometimes Trump has won, sometimes Trump has lost. In this situation, they did the same thing. They went to the Supreme Court with an emergency docket and asked the Supreme Court to reverse the partial stay that the lower courts issued. As you know, when Trump issued his executive order, basically trying to change the Constitution, saying that birthright citizenship as enshrined in the Constitution doesn't mean what it says, which is if you're born in this land, you are a citizen. He tried to change that by executive order and also in there kind of directed the departments to no longer issue birth certificates, making it practically difficult for anybody born here to prove their citizenship. So they, various people went into court to try to stop this. 3 different cases. We have one case involving 22 attorneys general. We have some nonprofits called CASA. And all 3 of the judges that looked at these cases all issued their preliminary injunction, putting a pause on the enforcement of the executive order, including a pause basically on the stopping of these birth certificate documents. These cases have now all been consolidated and brought up to the Supreme Court. So that issue, however the Supreme Court resolves it, will be for all of the 3 underlying cases. So the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to not substantively look at the case. They asked the Supreme Court to reverse the partial stay. And as I said, we've seen the Supreme Court go ahead and do that without oral arguments. But they took this up as an oral argument. But the interesting thing is typically when we see an oral argument in front of the Supreme Court, the party has an essential question that the Supreme Court is trying to resolve. It's like a legal question. It would be something like, would this person have standing, or does this create liability, or like the legal issue that is at stake. You could say that an essential question, if they were looking at this substantively, would be, does the birthright citizenship require somebody to be born here by a child of a resident? But there was no essential question presented because this wasn't a petition for review of an underlying case that went to trial, let's say, or actually had the merits fleshed out. This is coming in front of the court on a procedural ground. The procedural ground is they're asking them to reverse that lower court's injunction. But the fact that the Supreme Court didn't just either uphold the lower court's injunction or reverse the lower court's injunction, which they have done, which all the other emergency appeals, but they decide to schedule an oral argument, shows that the Supreme Court is going to look into the substance of the issues. And we don't have an essential question. So that means they don't have an essential question, which means we don't know how far they are willing to go. We could have, this is the range of what could happen. We could have everything. And we will, I think, have everything discussed tomorrow at the oral argument. We're going to hear about nationwide injunctions, and I'll go into that again in a little bit. Why they're good, why they're bad, not just in this particular case, but in general. We're going to hear about birthright citizenship, why it is constitutionally only required that somebody's born on this land. We're going to hear from Trump saying, oh no, they have to be born to maybe not citizens, but at least legal residents. We're going to get into all of that because they got into all of that on their papers. Their filings with the court didn't just limit themselves to that particular preliminary injunction in this case, but they talked about nationwide injunctions in general. And then they also went into the substance of birthright citizenship. So I imagine we're going to hear questions regarding all of that. But in terms of what the court is looking at, it's going to be basically up to them. They could do something as limited as affirm the lower court's preliminary injunction, which means that the status quo remains the same and people born here continue to be citizens as that case proceeds through trial. They could do something as limited as that. They could go into the next step, which is deciding whether or not they like whether or not they like national injunctions. What a national injunction is one district court judge could make a decision not just on the parties in front of them, which is typically how the law goes. If you are suing your neighbor, you are asking for relief for you or your neighbor. The judge usually typically looks at the facts and law presented to them and makes a decision only to those parties. Nationwide injunctions kind of expand on that theory, and they have the judge issue an injunction that doesn't apply just to the parties in front of them, but to the entire nation. And this has been used as a tool for forum shopping by both Democrats and Republicans. And quite a bit of those justices have been public about not liking it. Even Justice Kagan, they don't like the idea. There is this idea that a justice can have too much power. On the other hand, we have the executive branch. And what we're seeing here is obviously Trump trying to expand his executive power. So I think a lot of the discussion tomorrow is going to be, one, how do you do that balance? Because there is a legitimate argument that one judge in Texas shouldn't control the entire country, right? When it happens to us, we don't like the fact that Kaczmarek in Texas has so much power. Is that too much judicial overreach? They're going to talk about judicial overreach. Listen for that phrase. But then they're going to say, but when you have a situation where the executive maybe is doing something illegal, how would you check that if you don't have a nationwide injunction? Trump tried to argue that they could have class actions. So somebody can sue based on the entire class, I suppose, in this situation would be like every child born in America would be the class action. And then you wouldn't have to worry about a nationwide injunction because technically you're a party to the court. I could see that not being great because what if the lawyer that brings that class action is not aligned with your views? Like, let's say a Trump lawyer brings that class action and purposely tanks the case. So this is going to be an interesting thing. But we're going to hear, I think, most of the argument tomorrow is going to be this distaste that I think pretty much all of them are going to articulate to some degree or another. Alito, Thomas, Gorsuch, very much on the record, they don't like this. Justice Kagan even going on the record saying she doesn't like this. Roberts being more close to his vest about this. But technically, they don't really ever want anybody to have too much power. So they're going to grapple with how do you effectively not make one judge too powerful, but on the other hand, how do you protect people from something illegal happening to them? And they're going to have a hard time trying to create a standard. The Supreme Court always wants to create a workable standard because they don't want the parties to keep coming back to them over and over. If you can't create a workable standard, then it creates more work for them. This is why they have had a hard time with gerrymandering, because they have said, we have a hard time creating a standard that is going to be workable. So they kind of end up seeing it case by case. So they're going to want to come up with a standard. This class action thing is going to be one of the things that gets thrown out there. We'll see what they have to say about that. That was my own opinion there. So we're going to hear a bulk of that. Then we're going to hear discussions about birthright citizenship. And we're going to hear from Trump. He's going to say that the prior Supreme Court precedent, the only prior Supreme Court precedent, had to do with Kim Jong-ark. His parents were legal residents. And in the essential question presented, that was part of the question. It was, Is he a citizen if he was born here, but to Chinese citizens that were legal residents? The opinion doesn't make it dispositive that it had to be legal residents. They, in fact, didn't even really discuss whether or not his parents had to be here legally or not. That was not even part of the opinion. It was just a fact that was noted. And this is what the Trump, is clinging on to, was like, oh, that fact. And the other side, arguing that it's just a fact. And for 100 years, the executive branch always expected it to be, you didn't have to be legal. Your parents didn't have to be legally here. We've always acted on that. In terms of federal statutes, they've also always acted on that. So Trump is just kind of clinging to a word in that opinion. But we're going to hear, and this is going to be very interesting, is what that discussion is. We will get, because these justices really aren't on the record with regard to this. And if we hear questions that really get too much into this birthright citizenship, that is going to be a red flag, that even if they don't address it here, that this is going to be one of those things that they're going to try to chip away at. If they even see like a glimmer of hope, if the Trump administration sees even a glimmer of hope in the questioning, this birthright citizenship isn't going to go away. But so that's the spectrum of what we can see from this. We can see them focusing just on this particular issue of whether or not the injunction should be stayed or not. The respondents saying, there is no emergency for us to lift this injunction because we've been giving citizenship for 100 years. Even if Trump is right, there is no emergency here. Don't change the lower court's injunction. And that could be all the Supreme Court does. Even if there's a lot of justices that don't like nationwide injunctions, they may not be able to agree on something. And we can have as small of a decision as that. In January, the Biden administration, in fact, asked the Supreme Court to look at nationwide injunctions. And they declined to do that. They did something similar where they just made the smallest decision possible because it's going to be tough for them all to agree on it. But we'll see what happens. They're obviously wanting to take a closer look at it. Otherwise, if they wanted to just make that small decision about the injunction, they didn't even need to hold oral arguments. But we can see the spectrum of them just deciding on that particular injunction. We could see them finally grappling with nationwide injunctions, trying to create some sort of standard that protects people, at the same time discourages forum shopping. And then we could see them go as far as birthright citizenship, because there is no essential question. It's going to be up to them. And all of that is in front of their pleading. So this is going to be a very, very, one of the most interesting oral arguments we've heard in a really long time. So join us during that live. Stay for after the live, where Popok and I will give you real-time analysis of what we think they might land in that spectrum. My name is Dina Doll for the Legal AF channel. Free subscribe. Tune in for our live tomorrow.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.